This week, Lent begins and Pope Francis has 3 things you should do. One cardinal makes headlines with his comments on the role of women at the next synod, and we have details of another papal interview. Hello and welcome to Vatican Connections as we begin Lent. This week brought us Ash Wednesday, and Pope Francis led the penitential service at the Church of St. Anselm, as well as the procession to the Basilica of St. Sabina, where he celebrated Mass. Now, this is all part of a Roman tradition, and we'll have more on that coming up. Pope Francis has given another interview to the press. This time he sat down with Ferruccio de Bortoli, the editor-in-chief of the Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera. The Pope answered questions about his leadership method, the role of women in the Church, the upcoming Synod on the Family, sex abuse, and the Holy See's relations with China, as well as his relationship with the Pope Emeritus. He said he has asked Benedict XVI for advice and stated, "The Pope is not a statue in a museum, he's an institution." He also said some people wanted Benedict to retire to a Benedictine monastery somewhere and disappear, but Pope Francis sees Benedict as a grandfather with wisdom to share. He said the wisdom of grandparents strengthens families and they don't deserve to end up in a rest home. Another revelation, when asked about the Holy See's relations with China, Pope Francis said he wrote to the new Chinese president days after being elected, and the president wrote back to him. He said there are some relations with China. For a more in-depth look at the Corriere della Sera interview, visit the Vatican Connections webpage or our blog. The reforms to the Curia are also front and center. Last week, of course, Pope Francis created 2 new economic bodies. This week, he started appointing the people who will run those offices. One of them is the Monsignor who currently serves as Pope Francis's secretary, Monsignor Alfred Suereb. We'll have more about Monsignor Alfred, as he's known, when we look at the resignations and nominations. While Pope Francis continues his reforms of the Curia, for some cardinals, it is business as usual, and that means traveling to unexpected places. Cardinal Jean-Louis Tauran was in Benin this week, meeting with members of the Bishops' Conference Committee for Interreligious Dialogue. He told Vatican Radio Benin can be a good model of coexistence for surrounding nations because it has not experienced war and is quite open to interreligious dialogue, including the traditional African religions. Cardinal Tauran said what struck him about the local religion is that believers expect that everything that happens in life is supernatural, so nothing is profane and everything is sacred. He said he was touched by the interreligious dialogue he saw in Benin. And Cardinal Peter Turkson will be traveling to South Sudan this month. The Catholic radio network of South Sudan revealed the Cardinal will be in the country from March 18th to 23rd. And another cardinal made headlines this week for his comments on the role of women in the Church. In an interview with the Italian newspaper Avvenire, Cardinal Walter Kasper said the Church needs the feminine genius. The interview touched on the role of women specifically at the upcoming synod. The cardinal said the role of women needs to be reconsidered for 2 reasons. God created man and woman both in his image with equal dignity, and in baptism the woman is a Christian just as much as any man, and therefore there cannot be any discrimination. Now, applying this to the upcoming Synod on the Family, he said, there are always women at synods, but usually in background roles, and usually 2 or 3 women auditors are there, but they don't get to speak until all the prelates have spoken. He asked, how is it possible to prepare 2 synods on the family without involving women in a significant way? Asked his personal opinion on the role of women in the Church, he said women need to be present at all levels, even in positions of full responsibility. And he then said, if we removed women from the equation, Many parishes would have to close tomorrow. Finally, the gardens of the papal summer residence at Castel Gandolfo are now open to the public for the first time ever. The papal villa is located 24 kilometers southeast of Rome and has traditionally been used by popes during the summer months when Rome gets too hot. Pope Benedict XVI lived there for several months after resigning from the papacy, and Pope Francis decided not to take a vacation this past summer. So for the first time, tourists can visit the gardens of the summer residence. Now, if you're headed to Rome anytime soon and you want to check out the papal gardens at Castel Gandolfo, we'll have a link on our blog for booking information. Did you know? In Rome, it is tradition during Lent to visit a different church each day. There's a list of which church to visit on which day. The tradition goes back to the early Roman Church when the bishop would make a point of celebrating Mass at parishes throughout the diocese. It was a full week at the Vatican for Pope Francis. Let's take a look at what went on. Over the last weekend, Pope Francis had to skip one of his scheduled appointments. He was running a slight fever and his doctor advised him to stay in and rest. He had to cancel his visit to Rome's major seminary. By Monday, he was back up and on his feet. He met with members of the Italian Federation for Spiritual Exercises. Vatican Television has more.
A week before beginning his own Lenten spiritual exercises, Pope Francis greeted members of the Italian Federation of Spiritual Exercises, which is marking its 50th anniversary. Pope Francis said such an important anniversary was an opportunity for them to take stock and reflect on their history and recall their roots as they read the new signs of the times. The men and women of today need to meet God, to know Him, not from hearsay, Pope Francis said. Your service is completely oriented towards this, and you accomplish this by providing spaces and times of listening intensely to the Word in silence and prayer. He commended the doctrinal and spiritual competence and quality of the personnel working in the Federation's spiritual retreats and houses, but reminded them that the protagonist of the spiritual life is always the Holy Spirit, who sustains everything we do. The Lenten spiritual exercises for Pope Francis and the Roman Curia will be held from March 9th to 14th and will take place in the Alban Hills outside of Rome.
Pope Francis also met with the full group of bishops from Spain who were concluding their Ad Limina visit. He spoke to them about the current state of the Church in Spain and around the world, telling them faith is not a cultural heritage, but a gift that comes from a personal encounter with Christ. In Spain, this Ad Limina was seen as a gentle wake-up call for the Spanish Church, reminding them that the faith is not about hardline approaches to difficult situations, but about reaching out and inviting people to faith. On Wednesday, Pope Francis held his general audience, this time focusing on Lent. CNS has more.
C'è il rischio di accettare passivamente certi comportamenti e di non stupirci di fronte alle tristi realtà che ci circondano. Ci abituiamo a vivere una società che pretende di fare a meno Dio, nella quale i genitori non insegnano più ai figli a pregare né a farsi il segno della croce. E io vi domando, i vostri figli, i vostri bambini, sanno farsi il segno della croce? Pensate, i vostri nipoti sanno farsi il segno della croce? Gli avete insegnato a farlo? Pensate e rispondete nel vostro cuore. Sanno pregare il Padre Nostro? Sanno pregare la Madonna con l'Ave Maria? Pensate e rispondete voi. La Quaresima giunge a noi come tempo provvidenziale per cambiare rotta, per recuperare la capacità di reagire di fronte alla realtà del male che sempre ci sfida.
Later that afternoon, Pope Francis led his first Ash Wednesday liturgy as Pope and Bishop of Rome. Now, the liturgy really begins in the Basilica of St. Anselm on the Aventine Hill. From there, Pope Francis and the Benedictines from St. Anselm Pontifical College processed to the Basilica of St. Sabina, where the Pope celebrated Mass. In his homily, he said there are 3 elements to Lent: prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. He said, in the face of so many wounds that hurt us and could lead us to a hardness of heart, we are called to dive into the ocean of prayer, which is the ocean of the boundless love of God, in order to experience his tenderness. Speaking about the 3 elements of Lent, he said, fasting only makes sense if it chips away at our security and benefits someone else. He said almsgiving should be common among all Christians because Christians give concrete help and attention to those in need without wanting anything in return. He also said it frees people from the obsession of possession and the fear of losing what they have. The need for conversion is clear, he added. There is something not right with us, with our society, with the Church, and we need to change, to turn, and to convert. Then on Thursday, Pope Francis met with the clergy of Rome in what is an annual tradition for the Bishop of Rome. Speaking from a prepared text, which he often put aside to add personal anecdotes, Pope Francis talked to the priest about mercy and hearing confession. He also confessed, so to speak, that he once took the cross off the rosary of a dead priest when he was vicar general in Buenos Aires. Now, the priest was a well-known confessor who Pope Francis looked up to as an example of patience and mercy. As he was arranging the flowers around the priest's coffin, he removed the cross from the rosary and put it in his breast pocket, looked at the priest and said, "Give me half your mercy." Pope Francis said he has carried that cross in his pocket until the day he was elected pope. Now he carries it in a cloth pouch under his cassock. He told the priests their ministry of mercy reaches its highest point in the sacrament of reconciliation and is most needed by people who have left the Church because they don't want anyone to see their wounds. He urged the priests to make time to hear confession, and he asked those priests some of the questions that he said he asks priests who come to him for counseling, including, how do you end your day, with television or with the Lord? And that was the last scheduled event on the Pope's docket before leading the Angelus on Sunday and leaving for Aricia with the Roman Curia for his Lent retreat. As we mentioned off the top of the show, Pope Francis nominated his own personal secretary, Monsignor Alfred Zwerab, as the Secretary General for the new Secretariat for the Economy. The move was totally unexpected. In fact, just days earlier, Spanish and Italian media reported that a Spanish Monsignor, Lucho Vallejo Bada, would be taking on that role. Now, there's no real explanation as to why that happened. Vallejo Bada told reporters it was actually never a done deal, and when reports circulated that he would be Cardinal Pell's number 2, the situation was still being studied. Monsignor Vallejo Bada will stay in his current position as Secretary of the Prefecture of Economic Affairs of the Holy See. The other curial appointments this week also involved financial institutions. Pope Francis named Cardinal Santos Abrili Castello the new prefect of the Commission of Cardinals that oversees the Institute for Works of Religion, which you might know as the Vatican Bank. Cardinal Abrili Castello has spent most of his priesthood in Rome and has served in the Vatican's diplomatic corps. On this side of the ocean, a new auxiliary bishop was appointed to Portland, Oregon. Monsignor Peter Smith was actually born in South Africa, in the Diocese of Durban. He has degrees in business administration and law. He came to the U.S. because he was part of an ecumenical charismatic movement called the Brotherhood of the People of Praise. That group was invited to the Diocese of Portland in the 80s, and it was there that Monsignor Smith entered the seminary. He was ordained for the Diocese of Portland in 2001 and is currently Vicar General for the Archdiocese. He is expected to be ordained April 29th. And one appointment getting attention is the new auxiliary for Buenos Aires. Pope Francis appointed Father Ernesto Giovando as the 5th auxiliary for the city. Now, the reason this is getting attention, though, is because Father Giovando is a Jesuit priest. That's it for Vatican Connections. Now, don't forget, you can send us your questions or comments or your stories about your faith this last year. You can send us those questions and comments by email, Facebook, or Twitter. We want to hear from you. Now, join us next time as we take a look over the first year of Pope Francis's papacy. From everyone here, thanks for watching.